Hey guys, tonight we begin with a slow, careful step back in time to a place where river and sky met, where the land remembered water even in its driest hours. Welcome to Kemet, the land we now call Ancient Egypt. Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these videos, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. We begin gently. Imagine yourself reclining on a low reed mat beside a river. The air is cool with early morning mist. You hear birds stirring, a distant call of geese, the soft splash of a fishing net being pulled through water. This is the Nile, slow and patient, the spine of Kemet. And in its long, repeating rhythms, the story of a civilization quietly unfolds. Chapter 1. The place and the pulse, geography, climate, and the Nile. A map in your mind, a narrow ribbon of fertile land threading through an otherwise ancient sun-baked landscape. To the north, that ribbon fans into a delta, a quiet, marshy triangle opening to the Mediterranean. To the south, the river flows from farther lands, passing cliffs and cataracts, gathering stories and silt as it goes. On both banks of that ribbon, life clings to the water. Papyrus reeds bending in the breeze, small villages clustered like beads on a string, oxen plodding fields that will soon drink the river's gifts. Kemet, which means the black land in the ancient language, took that name from the dark, rich soil left behind when the Nile flooded each year. That black soil was the beginning of everything, the reason crops grew, the reason settlements stuck close to the riverbank, and the reason political life and spiritual life could emerge on a dependable schedule. Think of the Nile as a patient clock. Unlike the sudden violence of flash floods, it rose and fell with a dependable seasonality for many centuries. Each year, the river would swell with rains and snowmelt from distant highlands, and the fields would be covered in a thin, nourishing layer of silt. Farmers learned to read that clock, to plant, to harvest, to wait. This rhythm shaped daily life and also shaped ideas about order and balance. The ancient Egyptians came to see the world as a place that could be known, tended, and harmonized. A worldview born from long practice with the river's steady heartbeat. Now, imagine the land beyond the fertile strip. To the east and west stretched deserts, not absolute emptiness, but quiet, wide spaces with their own slow life. The desert protected as much as it isolated. Caravans moved through it, trade routes unfolded like a slow-thinking web, and stone and minerals came from these harsher places for tools, jewelry, and the monuments that would later rise. The Nile itself was never alone. It was braided with life and human practice. Fishermen in reed boats watched the sunrise and called to one another. Women washed cloth at the water's edge, while children chased one another along the banks. Small temples and shrines dotted the shoreline. From these quiet, everyday practices grew communal memory and regional identity. How did people first gather along this river in ways that led to cities and kingship? The earliest chapters of Kemet's human history belong to what scholars call the pre-dynastic period. Long centuries of small villages and slowly growing complexity. People learned to store grain, to make better pottery, to weave linen, and to shape copper into tools. As villages multiplied along the river, networks of trade and exchange grew. Social roles became more defined. Leaders emerged, initially local heads who organized irrigation, trade, and conflict resolution. One gentle story that historians like to tell, a story that also helps us imagine the human side of those long centuries, is the rise of the first kings. Picture a leader who could coordinate many villages to repair dikes after a flood, who could direct teams to build a communal storehouse, who could speak for a region when strangers came. Over time, those tasks and responsibilities began to centralize. The person who could do these things well became a point of trust. That trust, on the banks of a river that everyone depended on, could become a kind of authority. As communities coalesced, so did religious sensibilities. The river and sky, the sun and the desert, became more than weather and landscape. They became actors in a sacred drama. People invented rituals to mark planting and harvest, to bless boats and fields, to ask for steady water and protection. The imagination of the people and the practical needs of farming blended, creating the earliest forms of what would become a formal religion tied to kingship, to cycles, and to order. Slowly, over many generations, the dual kingdoms of Upper and Lower Kemet came into being. Upper Kemet upriver to the south, Lower Kemet downriver to the north. Each had its own local centers, its own leaders, and its own customs. A long process of unification is often imagined, sometimes represented by dramatic acts like the famous ceremonial Narmer Palet, a carved stone object that seems to depict the unification of North and South under a single ruler. Whether myth, propaganda, or historical record, such objects remind us that the idea of a single, sacred rulership took root in people's minds. They needed someone to represent stability on a larger scale, someone who could guarantee the ordering of irrigation, the fair distribution of harvests, and the protection of trade routes. In this chapter, it's calming to imagine daily life on a small scale. A farmer waking before dawn to check irrigation channels, a potter shaping clay in the open air, a scribe in a small house practicing the marks that will become a script, a young couple collecting reeds for mat making, all interlaced into a rhythm of the seasons. This quiet, repetitive labor is the backbone of civilization. Small acts committed day after day, season after season, shaped by the river's pulse. We should also imagine the sounds of the landscape, water lapping against reeds, the soft creak of a wooden oar, the distant bleat of goats, the muted call of traders bartering at a market. These are calming, repeated sounds, not loud, not urgent. They are the background music of a life lived close to nature's cycles. There is, of course, complexity beneath that calm surface. Droughts happened. Floods could be late or early. Rivalries arose between villages. Yet even such stresses were met with practical solutions. Building better embankments, modifying planting schedules, pooling resources in communal granaries. In a way, the people of Kemet had to be keen observers of the world around them, always paying attention to subtle changes in the river, the wind, and the sky. Before we close this chapter, let us pause for a moment to breathe with the riverside. Inhale quietly, imagining the cool morning air. Exhale slowly, watching a heron take flight above the water. As you breathe, remember that Kemet's greatness grew not from sudden brilliance, but from patient, cumulative practice. From the quiet labor of many generations learning to live with and through the Nile. That slow accumulation of knowledge in agriculture, craft, trade, and ritual set the stage for everything that would follow: the rise of pharaohs, the construction of tombs, the flowering of art and literature. To gently remind you of the path ahead, in later chapters we will move from this riverside intimacy into the larger structures that grew from it, the earliest forms of leadership and statehood, the spiritual ideas that shaped kingship, the practical technologies of stone and metal, and the stories that people told about gods, death, and destiny. Each chapter will be another slow step deeper, revealing new textures of this ancient world while keeping our pace calm and steady. Chapter 2: The Rise of Cities, Craft Specialization, and Early Kingship. Allow your breath to find a steady, even tempo as we move further from the water's edge and into the small towns and burgeoning cities that rose like quiet islands along the Nile. Picture again that reed mat and the slow song of the river. Now imagine following a narrow, dusty track inland where the hum of human activity grows steadier. We are leaving the intimate rhythms of household life and stepping into places where labor became more specialized. Goods were exchanged beyond the family, and people began to imagine political unity on a larger scale. Early settlements in Kemet did not spring up overnight. Over generations, a few places grew a little larger than their neighbors, usually where a natural harbor, a ford, or a particularly fertile stretch of land made trade and agriculture easier. These proto-urban centers became hubs for exchange, not only of grain and fish, but of ideas, raw materials, and techniques. Pottery styles spread, metalworking techniques traveled, and craftsmen learned from one another across rivers and deserts. One of the most meaningful changes of this era was the emergence of craft specialization. Imagine a narrow lane where one door leads to a potter's yard, the next to a copper worker, the next to a leather worker or a weaver. The potter shapes clay with practiced hands, forming jars and bowls that will hold grain, beer, or oil. The copper worker hammers, anneals, and polishes, producing adzes and small tools. The weaver pulls linen threads through a simple loom, producing cloth finer than the rough reed mats outside. Over time, such focused practice creates masters of craft, people whose hands remember steps that others do not. With specialization came dependency and trust. A farmer would trade grain for a potter's jars. A trader would bring foreign beads in exchange for copper. These exchanges knit communities together into networks. Traders and caravan leaders became important channels for distant goods, semi-precious stones, timber from faraway forests, copper from Sinai, and perhaps gold and ebony moving up from Nubia. Even in these early centuries, Kemet was not isolated. It was part of a slow-moving world of exchange. As craft and trade grew, so did symbolic production. Pottery was not only practical, it became a surface for expression. Painted designs began to appear, simple lines, chevrons, and later more complex motifs. Small carved objects, figurines, and carved palettes appear in graves and shrines. These items say something about how people thought of identity, status, and memory. Burial goods, in particular, start to show social differences. Some graves are modest, while others are generously furnished with tools, ornaments, and symbolic objects. From these differences, we can feel the stirrings of social stratification. The idea of a leader or leader figure also changed during this era. A village head who once coordinated irrigation now had neighbors who recognized his power and authority across a wider region. The symbolic trappings of that power began to take shape: titles, insignia, and rituals. We see early iconography, depictions on stone palettes and decorated vessels that suggest a person who commands people and territory. Such images are not straightforward records. They are claims, stories made visible. They tell a listening world. This person holds order for us. From time to time, a single center grew markedly larger and more influential than others. Places like Nekhen, often called Hierakonpolis in later Greek sources, Abydos, and later Nakata, became focal points for power. Here, building activity intensifies. Large ritual enclosures appear, and monumental burials begin to show more elaborate architecture and richer grave goods. Imagine an early leader's tomb, a gently sloping mound of earth, carefully arranged grave goods, and the slow rituals of mourners reciting the names and deeds of the dead. Such tombs begin to mark the landscape, visible reminders of lineage and authority. Another slowly emergent feature was the creation of proto-writing. Simple marks on pottery and carved signs on pallets and tags begin to appear. The first steps toward a script that could record names, offerings, or ownership. These marks are tentative at first, like sketches, yet they hold a promise, a way to fix memory beyond the fleeting voice. For a civilization whose rhythms depend on cycles and record keeping, of harvests, of temple inventories, of gifts, such a capacity mattered. The scribe would soon become a central figure, the keeper of lists, the drawer of maps, the recorder of rituals. Let me bring this to life with a quiet story, a small scene to settle into. Imagine a young apprentice named Kemet, who wakes before dawn to the soft glow of embers in the household hearth. He is learning to be a potter. His master, an older woman whose hands are calloused and sure, guides his fingers as he coaxes wet clay into a rounded jar. The wheel is a simple plank, the clay cool beneath his palms. Outside, the river moves somewhere beyond the reed beds, and men carry baskets through the dawn mist toward the fields. Kemet's work is calm, repetitive, and satisfying. Each jar he makes has slight variations, a lip a little too thin, a body a touch more bulbous, but each is also a deliberate act. When the jar dries and is fired, it may be traded in the morning market for dates or for a small length of linen. Sometimes the master will paint a simple motif, a zigzag for water, a dot for seed. Slowly, Kemet learns to recognize patterns that are not just decoration, but language, signs that tell who made the jar, where it was meant to go, or for what ritual it is intended. Next door, a scribe called Merit keeps a crude tally on a sliver of pottery, a mark for a measure of barley, a knot symbol for a herd. He practices the tiny incisions that will become a formal sign. Each day, he polishes a reed stylus and presses it against clay tags. The motion is precise, meditative. The scribe's work is quiet, but it matters. It is the work that ensures fair distribution of grain in a lean year, reconciles debts, and records the gifts made to a temple. Merit's hand is the first place memory is given a permanent shape. These small domestic and workshop scenes are the foundation upon which later monuments will be built. Specialization and record keeping make possible larger public projects. Canals dug with coordinated effort, communal granaries filled and managed, and later, the large stone constructions that will capture the world's imagination. We should also consider the human costs and negotiations within these growing societies. Social differentiation meant that some families accumulated wealth and rank, while others remained smallholders. Labor for large projects required organization. Many workers would be mobilized seasonally to repair embankments or to quarry stone. These were not always coercive systems. Much work was seasonal, and involvement in communal labors could enhance social bonds. Yet inequality also meant power could be concentrated, and disputes over resources or prestige could become sources of tension. In a softly spoken way, we can accept that the same processes that allow art and architecture to flourish also create hierarchies, a human complexity that is neither wholly good nor wholly bad, simply part of social life. As this chapter draws to a close, breathe with the scene of the workshop again. Hands shaping clay, the soft clink of tools, the quiet counting of tokens. In the next chapters, we will follow these social and economic pathways into fuller forms of rulership, into ritual life made visible in temples and tombs, and into the development of formal writing and administration that will sustain an ancient state for centuries. There is a gentle continuity here, small acts of craft and record-keeping that grow over generations into the power to raise monuments and write enduring histories. Chapter 3: The Pharaoh and the Sacred Order, Kingship, Ma'at, and the Heart of Authority. Settle back into your comfortable place. Take a slow, even breath in and out. Let the steady rhythm of the Nile from our earlier chapters still be present at the edges of your mind as we turn gently now to one of the most important threads in Kemet's tapestry: the idea of rulership, the pharaoh, and the sacred order that gave meaning to political life. To the people of ancient Kemet, leadership was never only practical. It was woven with the language of the sacred. Farming, trade, law, and defense all mattered, of course, but leaders were imagined as guardians of cosmic balance. The single word that helps us hold this balance is Ma'at, a concept that is both simple and profoundly far-reaching. Ma'at is the idea of order, truth, harmony, and the right way of living. When Ma'at prevailed, crops grew, the Nile rose as expected, disputes were settled fairly, and the sun rose each morning. When Ma'at faltered, chaos followed. The ruler, later called the pharaoh in Greek, from the Egyptian per-3, great house, which originally referred to the royal household, was the living guarantor of Ma'at. The king's role was to preserve balance, to ensure that the land was irrigated, that grain stored and shared, that enemies were kept at bay, and that rituals were performed to sustain cosmic cycles. In public life, this meant overseeing large projects, adjudicating disputes, and leading military expeditions when necessary. In sacred life, it meant performing or sponsoring rituals that maintain the favor of the gods. Imagine the moment when a new king takes his place. There is a slow, ceremonious quality to coronation rites. The scene is quiet but charged, much like the shifting light just before dawn. The new ruler may be led into a temple precinct where priests and attendants stand in rows. Incense curls in the air. Offerings of bread, beer, and flowers are arranged on stone altars. The king is presented with certain symbols: the white crown of Upper Kemet and the red crown of Lower Kemet, sometimes combined as the double crown, which visually embodies the unity of the two lands. The uraeus, the rearing cobra worn at the brow of the crown, signals protection and royal authority. The royal kilt, the ceremonial beard, the crook and flail, These accoutrements all tell a quiet story. This person is now the mediator between heaven and earth. Crucially, the pharaoh is both human and a representative of the divine. In many expressions of royal ideology, the king is the son of a god, often associated with Horus in life and in death, identified with Osiris, the lord of regeneration. This dual identity allowed the society to place practical expectations on the ruler, manage the fields, administer law, while also investing rulership with meaning that extended beyond any single lifetime. Because the king embodied Ma'at, his actions had moral consequence. A just ruler supported Ma'at. Injustice or mismanagement risked disorder. But the machinery of rule did not rest on one person alone. A complex administrative system supported the pharaoh. Viziers, chief advisors and managers, supervised officials responsible for taxes, granaries, and public works. Provincial governors, often called nomarchs, handled local governance in the nomes, administrative districts. Scribes, whose skill with writing was rare and highly respected, recorded accounts, drafted legal documents, typed inventories, and kept the administrative heart beating. Priests, meanwhile, maintained temples, performed rituals, and managed temple estates, which were often large economic units in their own right. Together, these actors formed a network that made the abstract idea of the state practical and durable. Temples deserve a soft, attentive moment here because they were more than stone. They were living centers. Each temple was a house of a god, a place where offerings were made, rituals performed, and clerics tended to the daily needs of the deity. Picture the temple as a series of spaces that move from public to private. An open forecourt where ordinary people might gather, hypostyle halls where light filtered in through high windows, making patterns on columns, and the inner sanctuary, a quiet, narrow chamber where the statue of the god rested and only priests entered. The temple precinct might include workshops, granaries, and fields, productive spaces that supported the priesthood and the rituals themselves. Ritual practice, from daily offerings to grand festivals, helped unify communities. Festivals were moments of shared presence, processions along the Nile where statues of the gods were carried on boats, music and dancing in temple courts, the scent of incense, the rustle of linen garments, and the sight of decorated barges moving slowly over the water. The Opet Festival, or the Beautiful Festival of the Valley, are examples of such communal celebrations that reinforced both religious devotion and political cohesion. These festivals gave people a shared calendar, a set of rhythms beyond planting and harvest that knitted everyday life into a wider cosmic story. Let us pause to listen to a small, imagined scene. The hush before dawn as a temple awakens. A young priest called Ankef steps into a courtyard. He smells the cool stone and the distant sweet smoke of incense. He washes carefully, wraps himself in linen, and approaches the sanctuary where he lays out small loaves of bread and a cup of beer. He intones prayers with measured cadence, each sound a thread woven back toward Ma'at. Outside, townspeople begin to stir. A boat will be loaded later for today's festival. For Ankef, this is not spectacle. It is the work of maintaining order, of ensuring that the gods remain kindly to the land. This closeness between ritual and administration also meant that temples accumulated wealth. Temples owned fields worked by laborers whose crops fed the priests and paid for ceremonies. Temples could thus become major economic players, patrons of craft, storage sites for grain, and even lenders in times of need. This economic role sometimes placed the priesthood in positions of power that could supplement royal authority. We should also gently consider the moral expectations placed upon rulers. The stories and wisdom literature of Kemet emphasized good governance, fair speech, restraint, generosity to the poor, and the avoidance of arrogance. Instruction texts, often framed as advice from a father to his son, wrote quietly but firmly about virtues to be cultivated. A ruler who embraced Ma'at was praised. One who neglected it was described in tales as bringing drought or revolt. In this way, ideology and practicality met. The survival of the state depended on the ruler's ability to sustain both physical necessities and ethical order. The pharaoh's death, when it came, was another profound moment where politics, religion, and memory intertwined. The body of the ruler was prepared with exceptional care, and mortuary practices were arranged to ensure a successful journey into the afterlife. The king's tomb was not simply a place for burial, it was an ongoing house for the king's spirit. Mortuary priests maintained offerings, recited spells, and managed rituals to sustain the pharaoh's ka, the life force that needed food and drink, and to help transform the deceased into an Ak, an effective, luminous spirit. Here we introduce three gentle terms that will become important in later chapters because they shape so much of Egyptian practice: the Ka, the Ba, and the Ak. The Ka is often understood as the life force, the vital double that required sustenance. The Ba is the personality, that which could move between the tomb and the world. It was often depicted as a bird with a human head. The Ak is the transformed, effective being achieved after proper funerary rites and judgment. Each of these ideas made the afterlife a carefully managed reality rather than an abstract concept. Mourning, ritual offerings, and tomb provisions were acts of care that sustained relationships across the threshold of death. We will explore funerary practice and the art of mummification in later chapters, but for now, allow the idea to rest like a calm stone. Society cared deeply for the cycle of life and death, and rulers, by virtue of their role, sat at the hinge of that care. The pharaoh's burial was a public and sacred event, with practical consequences. Tombs needed resources, and mortuary cults required administrators. This nexus between economy and ritual again shows how religion and politics in Kemet were braided together. Finally, consider the human side of kingship. Not every pharaoh was universally beloved. Not every priesthood was entirely harmonious with the state. There were moments of reform, periods of decentralization when regional rulers gained more autonomy, and times when foreign powers influenced the throne. These are natural patterns in long histories, yet the persistent strand is this: people in Kemet experienced their world through layers of ritual, memory, and routine that made kingship plausible, meaningful, and necessary. As we close this chapter, breathe with the image of the temple at dusk, the soft glow of oil lamps, the silhouette of a statue against deepening sky, the faint echo of a hymn carried on a night breeze. The pharaoh is both an office and an idea, a human being charged with the sacred duty of keeping Ma'at. He is supported by a network of scribes, priests, administrators, and laborers who together weave the visible fabric of state. In the next chapters, we will move softly from this ideological core into the material expressions of power, the building of stone, the shaping of sacred space, the technologies that allowed monuments to rise, and the stories told on tomb walls that preserved names across centuries. Each step will remain gentle, detailed, and rooted in the human rhythms of ancient life. Chapter 4: Stone, Sweat, and Scale. How monuments were made. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders loosen. Picture the bright, dry air of a river plain as the sun climbs. The scent of warm stone and dust mixing with the coolness that still lingers near the Nile. In this chapter, we move from ideas into material reality, from the thought of kingship and ritual into the very stones that held those thoughts for millennia. We will lean close to the labor, the tools, the planning, and the quiet genius that turned ephemeral human desire into monuments of wood, mud brick, and, most famously, stone. From small shrines to vast tombs and pyramids, Kemet's monuments were the physical language of memory and authority. They required sources of stone, people who could shape it, and methods to move it over distances that sometimes surprised later observers. Imagine the riverbanks lined with boats that glow in the low light, each carrying lengths of timber or blocks of stone. Imagine quarries ringing like sleeping mouths at the edges of the world, waiting to be opened. Types of stone and where they came from matter because they shaped what builders could imagine. Close to many settlements lay soft, workable limestone, easy to cut, easy to dress, ideal for core blocks and smooth outer casing. Farther south, in places like Aswan, rose the hard, compact granite that gleamed when polished and could form obelisks, statues, and sarcophagi that would endure the millennia. Sandstone appears in other regions, chosen for its size and workable nature. Each stone had character, its color, grain, and tensile strength guided how it would be used and how it would be carved. Quarrying was an act of careful listening. Workers read the stone visually and by touch, seeking natural lines of weakness. They used simple but effective tools, copper chisels and saws for softer materials, dolerite pounders, heavy, rounded stones, for pecking at harder rock, wooden wedges, driven into cut lines and then soaked with water, would expand and split the stone along the desired plane. It is calming to think of these repeated strokes, the rhythmic percussion of hammer on stone, the concentrated hush of hands guiding a chisel, the soft thud as wedges are tapped home. The process could be slow, measured, and meticulous, each block an act of patience. Once a block was freed, the question became transportation. Moving heavy stone across land required knowledge, coordination, and ingenuity. One quiet image often evoked is that of a loaded sledge gliding over the sand, pulled by groups of workers. In some moments, they would pour water on the sand in front of the sledge, not as an act of magic, but as a practical technique to reduce friction. The water slightly compacted the sand and cut down on the resistance, allowing heavy loads to be hauled by fewer men. Boats also played a vital role. The Nile was a highway, and large blocks could be loaded onto barges and floated to construction sites during high water. This seasonal dependence, the idea that certain works were best carried out when the river permitted, shaped both the rhythm and the logistics of building. Organization and labor are important, not as abstractions but as lived human experiences. Monumental work required skilled artisans, stonecutters, masons, carvers, and sculptors, and also large numbers of seasonal laborers. In calm, measured terms, think of two groups: those whose hands had learned fine gestures and those whose bodies provided sustained power. The skilled craftsmen measured, marked, and shaped. The larger workforce moved, lifted, and prepared. Workers were fed, housed near the project, and given responsibilities. Records and inscriptions from later periods suggest the existence of well-structured crews, overseers, and diets planned to keep laborers strong. Archaeology has revealed workers' villages with bakeries, breweries, and medical supplies, signs of an organized workforce rather than faceless coercion. This organization speaks to a society that, while hierarchical, understood how to coordinate human effort for large-scale ends. Precision in building was not accidental. Builders used basic but reliable methods: ropes to measure and align, plumb lines to check verticality, and sighting along straight edges for orientation. Simple geometry governed decisions about angles, slopes, and the curvature of passageways. Architects would sketch plans and then guide teams to translate those plans into reality. In the case of pyramids and monumental tombs, the alignment with cardinal points and celestial bodies was often deliberate, embedding the construction into a cosmic map that joined earth and sky. This is a soothing thought that human hands, guided by practical geometry, sought to place earthly structures in conversation with the heavens. Ramps and lifting mechanisms are the quieter mysteries that invite many theories. Builders likely used combinations of ramps, straight, zigzagging, or wrapped around a rising structure, along with levers and sledges. The exact methods varied with time, place, and the stone in question. Whatever the design, the craftsmanship shows an ability to coordinate heavy loads, maintain alignment across large dimensions, and cut stone with an eye toward fit and finish that would stand the test of weather and time. Carving and finishing were the final, intimate acts. Once a stone block sat in place, the carver's chisel articulated form from mere mass. Scenes and inscriptions were carved into walls and stelae with a steady hand, reliefs that told of offerings, of king's deeds, and of journeys into the afterlife. Hieroglyphs, each pictorial sign chosen with care, were incised with precision, their forms meant to last as long as the stone itself, polishing smoothed surfaces to a soft sheen. In the dim inner chambers of a tomb, the manager of a craft workshop might supervise the final touches. The painting, gilding, and placement of objects meant to comfort and sustain the dead. Monuments were not only physical achievements, but also social contracts. A temple, a mastaba, or a pyramid said something to the living. To remember, to provide a place of communion with the divine, and to assert the permanence of a name. For the deceased, especially rulers, monuments were houses of eternity, structures that promised continued sustenance, ritual attention, and memory. Their scale declared not only wealth, but intention, a deliberate desire to link present deeds with future remembrance. Let me invite you into a small, imagined scene to make this concrete. Picture an overseer named Senu, whose real name echoes in 1,000 practical acts. Senu wakes before sunrise, tasting the cool air, and walks toward a busy construction platform where blocks form a stepped silhouette against the sky. He opens a ledger, a simple set of marks, to check which team will move the next block. Nearby, a carver smooths a block that will become a lintel. His small hammer rhythmically taps away, a quiet percussion that steadies the morning. A team of 30 men readies a sledge, sprinkling a thin curtain of water ahead in anticipation of the pull. Senu watches the alignment, nods, and whispers directions. Each movement here is deliberate. The shift of a rope, the angle of a lever, the even rhythm of the worker's breath. There's no frantic hurry, only coordinated human-scale timing. We should also gently acknowledge the human costs. Monumental labor required resources and sacrifices, time, grain, and communal effort that could have been used elsewhere. Tensions could and did arise about the allocation of labor or the purpose of large projects. Yet in many cases, the projects also created livelihoods, fostered mutual obligation, and offered a place where communities could participate in rituals that mattered to everyone. In the end, monuments connected people across generations. Builders who placed stones and priests who tended rituals, families who contributed labor and scribes who recorded names. As this chapter draws to a close, let the image rest. A long line of workers polishing a facade at dusk, the stone glowing gently in the amber light, the sound of water lapping against the bank. Ahead, in our next chapters, we will step into the cool darkness inside tombs and temples, into painted corridors, mummified bodies, funerary texts, and the stories carved into walls. We will listen to the voices those walls preserve, the prayers, the myths, and the quiet hopes of a civilization that sought to bend time through ritual and stone. Stay with me. We have many chambers left to explore. Chapter 5: Gates Between Worlds. Funerary practice, mummification, and the architecture of afterlife. Settle into your place. Take a soft, measured breath in, and let it go slowly. Keep that gentle rhythm as we pass from the bright exterior of monumental construction into the cool, shaded interior of tombs and the quiet rites that guided a soul beyond the river of life. In this chapter, we will walk slowly through the body of mortuary practice itself, the care of the dead, the rituals that accompanied them, the architecture that sheltered them, and the texts and objects meant to ease travel into a long, private night. The people of Kemet lived with death as part of a continuous human cycle. For them, a well-prepared death was not resignation. It was a careful project, a last work of love and purpose. The practices that surround death were practical and moral at once: to preserve the body, to sustain the ka, to enable the ba to move freely, and to secure the ak, the transformed and effective spirit. These ideas shaped funerary customs that varied over time, but shared a steady concern that the departed be remembered, provided for, and properly released into the next realm. Imagine the first soft scene: a family within a courtyard at dusk, oil lamps casting a warm circle of light, the quiet murmur of prayers, the bittersweet smell of resin and incense. There is a deliberate calm to these moments, an attentiveness to detail that is both loving and ritualized. The steps that follow are technical, solemn, and filled with intention. Mummification is the word we use now for the suite of procedures the Egyptians developed to slow decay and preserve the body. It is not a single technique, but a series of choices that changed across eras and with wealth. Yet there is a common thread: the desire to preserve the body as a home and symbol for the continuing life of the deceased. A typical embalming sequence, especially in its most elaborate forms, involved several stages. First, the body was ritually washed and purified. Priests recited spells and made offerings while the family observed. Then came the careful removal of internal organs, not out of disdain, but from practical preservation. Embalmers often removed the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, through a small incision at the left side of the abdomen. These organs were usually treated separately and placed in canopic jars, each jar protected by one of the 4 sons of Horus, guardians with their own symbolic attributes. The heart, however, was commonly left in place because it was believed to be the seat of thought and moral judgment. It would later be weighed in the Hall of Ma'at in judgment scenes of the afterlife. The brain was treated differently across time. In many cases, it was removed through the nose with hooked instruments and discarded, a practical step that astounded later observers. Then the body was thoroughly dried using natron, a naturally occurring mixture of salts that absorbed moisture. The drying process could take many days. The body might rest packed in natron for a long period to remove all dampness. Once dry, embalmers anointed the body with oils and resins to help seal and perfume it, and packed any cavities with linen or aromatic materials to restore lifelike form. Finally, the wrapping was an art form. Long strips of linen were patiently folded and bound, layer by layer. Amulets and small protective charms were placed within the wrappings at precise locations, over the heart, at the throat, at the limbs. Each amulet had a purpose: to protect, to empower, or to symbolically replace an organ. The final shroud might be painted with protective texts or images. The process of wrapping was meditative, each fold a deliberate gesture, each band tied with intention. Preparation did not end with physical work. Rituals accompanied the transition. One of the most evocative ceremonies was the opening of the mouth. This ritual, performed by priests, was meant to restore the senses to the deceased so they could speak, breathe, and receive nourishment in the afterlife. Using symbolic tools and ritual gestures, the officiant touched the lips, eyes, and ears of the mummy or statue, reciting spells that transferred vitality and communicative ability. Large funerals could be communal events with processions, lamentations, and offerings. Professional mourners sometimes called out the names and achievements of the deceased, while priests intoned prayers for safe passage. Friends and family placed food, drink, and goods in the tomb. These were not merely symbolic, but were believed to sustain the Ka in the early period until the mortuary cult took over regular offerings. To navigate the afterlife, the Egyptians developed an extraordinary body of funerary literature. These texts evolved across centuries, becoming both more widely available and more personalized. In the Old Kingdom, royal tombs sometimes contained the pyramid texts, collections of spells incised on the walls intended to ensure the king's safe ascent and transformation. These texts are some of the oldest religious writings in the world and were closely guarded for a century or more as royal prerogatives. By the Middle Kingdom, the coffin texts adapted many of these spells for non-royal use. Suddenly, people beyond the royal family could have protective inscriptions written on coffins to help them in the beyond. This reflects a subtle social spread of esoteric knowledge. More people could now aspire to protections once thought fit only for kings. Later, in the New Kingdom and after, we see the Book of the Dead on papyri, personalized scrolls that contained a selection of spells chosen for a particular individual. These were often accompanied by vignettes, painted scenes illustrating spells in action. Each book was tailored to the deceased's needs, a guidebook for the road ahead with instructions on how to pass gates, answer judges, and transform into the desired form for the afterlife. Other works, like the Amduat and the Litany of Re, describe the sun god's journey through the night and the hours of darkness, giving cosmic context to the personal journey of the dead. How the dead were housed changed across millennia. The earliest elite burials used mastabas, flat-roofed, rectangular superstructures of mud brick or stone with underground burial chambers. These simple but dignified monuments were the precursors to the grander forms that followed. The Old Kingdom gave us the development of mastabas into stepped forms and, eventually, smooth-sided pyramids, monumental attempts to create an enduring house of eternity for kings. Pyramids were both tomb and symbol, aligned with cosmic principles, and often set within entire complexes of temples and causeways. By the New Kingdom, there was a pronounced shift. Instead of enormous visible pyramids, royal burials were often cut into the sheltered cliffs of the Theban hills, the Valley of the Kings. These rock-cut tombs were hypogea, hidden, winding corridors descending into chambers painted with scenes of the sun's nightly journey and the deceased's passage through the netherworld. Concealment was partly practical, an attempt to guard against tomb robbery, and partly symbolic, a subterranean voyage that mirrored the sun's nightly travel. Tombs were stocked with objects of comfort and care, pottery for food, jars of oil and wine, finely woven linen, furniture, and personal items. Shabti, or ushabti figurines, small carved servants, were placed in tombs to perform the deceased's manual labor in the afterlife. Funerary masks and decorated coffins preserved the image of the person and served as a focus for offerings. Mortuary cults kept tombs alive. Priests, sometimes supported by the family, performed regular offerings at the tomb shrine. These cults could persist for decades, sustaining memory and providing a minor economy. Offerings required agricultural produce and craft goods, which in turn employed local artisans and laborers. In this way, funerary practice also structured social and economic life. It is calming to reflect that funerary practices bound communities together, shared ritual obligations, common calendars of remembrance, and collective investment in memory. Tombs anchored lineage claims and local identity. They also reflected the social order. The richness of tomb goods often mirrored wealth, status, and rank. At the same time, the spread of funerary texts to broader groups shows how spiritual possibilities expanded over time. We must gently acknowledge a shadow, tomb robbery, and the insecurity of memory. Even in antiquity, tombs were vulnerable to thieves who sought gold and valuables. This reality shaped architectural choices, secret inscriptions, and the move to hidden burials. The very desire for permanence was challenged by human appetites. Yet, even when material goods were lost, the written texts and the names carved into stone often persisted, granting a quieter immortality. Imagine a widow, Nesethor, who watches as embalmers and priests prepare her husband's body. She folds a final cloth, places a small amulet in the wrappings, and lingers to hear the opening of the mouth as a priest touches the lifeless lips with ritual implements. Later, at the tomb, she leaves bread and beer and whispers a private promise that she will return each month with offerings, that his name will be remembered. Her quiet vows are the social glue that keeps memory alive. Those vows become rituals that structure the months, seasons, and relationships of a household and a community. As we let this chapter settle, breathe in slowly and imagine the hush of a tomb chamber lit by a single oil lamp. painted scenes on walls, the smell of resin lingering in the air, a carefully wrapped mummy resting on its cedar-lined coffin. The measures the living took to care for the dead were crafted from love, fear, practicality, and deep belief. They created a landscape of remembrance that linked the living and the dead across generations. In the next chapter, we will open the painted walls and carved scenes. We will read the iconography, the visual language of gods and kings, and learn how art served ritual, politics, and daily life. We will discover how colors, forms, and poses carried hidden meanings that guided both the eye and the spirit. Chapter 6. Art and Symbols. Take a soft breath and let your eyes close for a moment if you like. Imagine a cool room carved from stone, lit by a few oil lamps. On the walls, color glows even in the dim light. These walls are not just decoration. They are words without sound. They tell stories, keep memories, and guide the spirit. In this chapter, we will walk slowly along those painted and carved surfaces and learn how to read them using simple words and quiet attention. Art in Kemet was practical and calm. Pictures were used to show what people did, to honor gods, and to help the dead. The images were clear and steady, so everyone could read them. Artists used a style that stayed the same for a very long time. This helped the pictures mean the same thing from one town to the next, and from one family to the next. It made the walls into a kind of shared language. One of the first things to notice is how people are shown. Heads are in profile, so you see the ear and the shape of the face. But the eye is shown from the front, and the shoulders and chest are often turned forward. Legs and feet are back in profile again. At first, this mix of views might seem odd, but it was meant to show the most important parts of the body clearly. The eye could see, the chest could breathe, and the legs could walk. This way of drawing is calm and steady. It tells you what each part of the body can do. Scale in the art was also a kind of language. Bigger often meant more important. A king or a god would be shown larger than a farmer or a servant. This did not always mean the king was taller as a person. It was a way to show who mattered most in the story on the wall. Animals were often painted at the right size to show what they were and what they did. Birds could be small, while a great bull might take up much space to show power. Colors were chosen with care. Red and yellow came from earth. Blue was made in a special way and felt precious. Green came from stones crushed into powder. Black came from soot, and white from soft stone or chalk. Each color had meaning. Red could stand for life, but also for heat. Green could mean new life and growth. Blue was often the color of the sky and the water. Gold, when used, stood for the sun and for what does not change. Colors were more than pretty. They were part of the message. The way lines are drawn is calm and simple. Artists used a thin brush made from reed or a small bundle of hair. They mixed their colors with a little water and a binder, maybe a plant glue or gum, to make paint that would stick to the stone. First, they might draw a plan in red or black ink. Then they would fill in forms with color. At the end, they often traced fine dark lines around the shapes to make them clear. This slow method gave the art a calm order. Scenes were often put in rows, one above another. These rows are called registers. A single wall might show many things. Boats moving along the river in the top row, people at work in the middle row, and offerings or animals in the bottom row. Reading the wall is like reading a quiet, slow picture book. Each row is a small chapter of a story. Faces and bodies are calm and controlled. You will not see wild, upset faces in most official art. People look measured, as if they understand their place and their duty. This helps the viewer feel steady. Even hunting scenes or battles are shown with careful lines and rhythm. The action is there, but it is not wild or chaotic. This keeps the mind from jumping and helps a calm mood stay. Gods in the art often wear crowns, animal heads, or special clothes, so you can know who they are. A god with a falcon head is not a falcon but the spirit of the sky. A god with a jackal head is linked to the dead. Symbols sit with these gods: an ankh for life, a feather for truth, a sun disk for the sky god. These small signs are like short words. Learn a few, and you can read simple messages on many walls. Temples and tombs had different kinds of pictures. In temples, the art showed offerings, the king before a god, and scenes that told how the god cared for the land. In tombs, the walls showed the life of the person, the food they might need, and spells or scenes to help them after death. Some tomb walls show boats for travel, grain for food, and servants to help. These images were meant to become real for the one who passed beyond life. They were gifts that continued to work in a new way. Carved reliefs feel different from painted scenes. In low relief, figures stand out gently from the stone. In high relief, they come out more fully and throw soft shadows. Carving is slow and deep. It is a quiet act of faith. Cut away what is not needed until the image stands out. Carvers would work with small chisels, careful hands, and often a steady song or count to keep time. The rhythm of the hammer is like a slow heartbeat. Skilled carvers could make stone feel soft and alive. Artists had rules to follow. These rules helped keep things clear and calm. There was a grid that could be drawn on the wall to make sure proportions stayed right. The grid was a simple tool, a set of lines that helped place eyes, shoulders, knees, and feet. Using the grid gave the whole scene a sense of calm order. It also made it easy for many hands to work together on a large wall and still make the figures look the same. Animals in the art carry meaning too. Cats were loved and linked to protection. Cows and bulls could mean strength and food. Crocodiles were dangerous but also powerful. Birds could be messengers between worlds. The way an animal is painted, still, eating, flying, tells you what place it holds in the story. Sometimes animals are shown as sacred companions to a god or a king. Other times they stand for simple, daily life, like a goose at a pond. Objects in the pictures are steady and plain. Boats, baskets, tools, and pots are shown clearly. This helps the wall teach about life and work. If a picture shows a person offering bread and beer, it tells us that food was part of kindness and ritual. If a picture shows a scribe with a scroll, it tells us that writing matters. The art keeps memory of both the ordinary and the sacred. There are also pictures that explain how the world moves. The sun's path, the yearly flood, the seasons. These ideas appear as cycles. The sun may be shown moving in a boat across the sky. The river may be shown full of fish and crops. These images teach the viewer to feel the slow circle of time. They are gentle reminders of balance and care. Not all art was for kings or gods. Simple scenes show children playing, people singing, and women weaving. These small pictures are warm and close. They tell us that daily life mattered as much as grand ritual. A woven mat, a child's toy, a loaf of bread. These small things anchor the great stories to human life. Think now of a quiet story, a young painter named Tefnut sits by a tomb wall. Her lamp is small, but her focus is steady. She has mixed blue from crushed stones and red from iron earth. Her brush is a thin reed. First, she traces the red lines that mark the shoulders and knees. Then she fills the shapes, slow and sure. Her brother sits nearby, carving small figures. They speak in low voices about the order of the world. For them, this work is a prayer and a craft. When the family returns to the tomb to leave bread and beer, they know the wall will hold the story safe. Art also changed over time, but gently. Some styles became more elaborate, others simpler. New gods rose and older ones changed. Sometimes foreign ideas came in and mixed with local ways, but the calm rule stayed. Pictures were made to say clearly what needed saying about life, death, and the gods. This long habit of clarity and care is part of why the art still speaks to us. As we finish this chapter, let the image of the slow painter and the carved stone rest in your mind. The walls are patient teachers. They ask nothing sudden of you. They invite you to look and to breathe. In the chapters to come, we will learn more about the gods shown on these walls, the stories told about them, and how those stories shaped the lives of ordinary people. We will also step closer to the small and private things that made daily life full. Food, clothing, games, and the songs that families sang at night. Chapter 7: Gods and Myths, the Living Stories. Take a slow breath and settle deeper into your seat. Imagine the soft sound of water from the Nile at night and the low glow of oil lamps in a village house. In that gentle light, stories are told. These are the oldest stories of Kemet, stories of the sky, the river, the dead, and the ways people tried to make sense of the great, small things in life. In this chapter, we will listen to those stories and meet the gods who shaped daily life, work, and hope. The people of Kemet saw the world as full of powers that lived close to them. The sun, the river, the sky, the land, and the animals could all hold a spirit. Over time, these spirits took on names and faces and became the gods we know from their pictures. Each god had a job or a part of the world to care for. Some watched over the dead, some watched over birth, some watched over the sun as it crossed the sky. The gods were not far away. They were part of the daily rhythm. People called on them when boats left the shore, when babies were born, when crops were planted, and when someone died. One of the central gods is Ra, the sun. Picture the sun rising in a bright orange boat over the eastern horizon. Ra sails across the sky by day and then journeys through the night to be reborn at dawn. Ra is often shown with a sun disk above his head. He is a god of light, life, and warmth. People thanked Ra for the day and asked for a safe return when night came. The sun's travel became a pattern that held the cycle of time: work by day, rest by night, and hope of light again in the morning. Another very important story is the tale of Osiris and Isis. This is one of the gentlest and also deepest myths. Osiris is a king who brings order and grain to the land. His brother, jealous and dark, plots against him and kills him. Osiris's wife, Isis, gathers his broken body and brings him back to life long enough to conceive a son, Horus. This story tells of loss and return, of grief and of care. It also gives a pattern for hope. Even in death, love and memory can make life go on. Osiris becomes ruler of the world of the dead, a kind and fair lord who judges the dead and watches over rebirth. Isis becomes a model of devotion and skill. a mother who protects and heals. Horus, the sun, grows up to challenge the usurper and to claim his place. Horus is often shown as a falcon or a man with a falcon head. He becomes linked with the ruler on earth, the king, who is thought to be Horus in life. These family tales of gods gave people a way to think about right and wrong, danger and safety, kingship and the order of things. They were not only big stories for temples, they were stories mothers told children and workmen hummed as they labored. Anubis is another calm, careful figure. He is the god linked to the dead and the care of the body. He often appears as a jackal or a man with a jackal head. People looked to Anubis when a person died. He watched over the mummified body, guided the soul, and helped in the weighing of the heart, the small, dramatic moment when the heart was placed on a scale against the feather of truth. If the heart was light with good action, the journey beyond would be safe. If not, the path could be hard. This idea taught people to live in a way that kept the heart light. Thoth is the calm keeper of words and numbers. He is often shown with the head of an ibis, a long curved beak like a careful pen. Thoth is the scribe of the gods. He writes the words that set the world right. He keeps time, measures, and records the results of the heart's weighing. People would call on Thoth when they needed wisdom, clear speech, or fair counting. In houses and shops, small images or words linked to Thoth helped ensure honesty and order. Hathor is warm and gentle like milk and song. She is a goddess of joy, music, motherhood, and the sky. Sometimes she appears as a cow, sometimes as a woman with cow horns that hold a sun disk. People gave offerings to Hathor to ask for fertility, good birth, and kind times. She is found in happy songs and festival dances, and her presence softens the hard work of the fields. Amun is a god who grows in fame over time. In some eras, people thought of him as one of the hidden great powers. In city temples, he could be shown with a tall crown and many names. In the minds of worshippers, Amun could be both a local guardian and a king of gods. This flexible nature made Amun feel close and far at once, a quiet power who could be called on when the need was strong. Sekhmet is the fierce one, a lioness goddess who can burn with anger like a dry wind. People asked Sekhmet to drive away disease and to protect the land from harm. At the same time, songs and rituals softened her fire, asking her to be kind. This balance, asking a powerful god to protect but not to harm, shows how people worked with forces that could be both helpful and dangerous. In small houses, gods were part of daily life. A family might have a small statue of Bez, a friendly, protective dwarf who chased away nightmares and watched over children. They might keep a simple image of Taweret, a hippo goddess who protected mothers and babies. On the kitchen shelf, a small offering of bread or beer might be set for household gods with a soft word for blessing. Priests and priestesses served gods at temples and taught people the proper rituals. They learned songs and prayers, the right order of steps and offerings that made the god listen. But not every ritual needed a temple. Simple acts, pouring a drink on the land, speaking a prayer while sowing seed, putting a little bread by a small shrine, were ways people met the gods every day. These small acts made life into a living prayer. Myths also helped people know how to live. Stories of justice, kindness, and balance told people what counted in life. Tell the truth, share when you can, care for the poor, and honor those who lead rightly. The tales of gods gave shape to rules that were felt in homes and markets. When a child learned a god story, that child learned a way to act in the world. One small scene might help the quiet power of these stories settle in. Picture a grandmother and her grandchild by the river at dusk. The child asks why the sun works like a boat. The grandmother smiles and tells how Ra crosses the sky, how he rests at night, and how each morning he returns. She tells of Isis, who gathered the pieces of her beloved, of Horus, who learned to protect, of Anubis, who helps the dead. The child runs fingers through cool water and feels the story as real as the river. The tale becomes part of the child's sleep and the child's dream. Across the land, festivals made these stories come alive. People would sing, dance, and carry the statue of a god in a small boat. The river became a stage where gods traveled, and the town became full of sound and color. These moments gave people a shared memory and a time of relief and joy from work. The myths are many and change with place and time. New names appear, old stories grow fresh lines, and local gods blend with wider tales. Yet the heart of these stories remains steady. They help people explain the hard things and the kind things, the rise of the sun and the fall of a life. They teach how to keep balance and how to hold hope. As we end this chapter, let the sound of the grandmother's voice and the slow flow of the Nile remain at the edges of your mind. In the next chapter, we will listen to the softer songs of daily life. What people ate, the clothes they wore, the games they played, and the quiet comforts of home. These small things will bring the world of Kemet close and warm. Chapter 8. Daily life, food, home, work, and play. Take a slow breath and let it settle. Imagine the soft light of morning on a mud brick house by the Nile. Hear the small sounds, a child laughing, the clack of a pot, the distant call of a boat. In this chapter, we will move close to the everyday life of the people of Kemet. We will learn what they ate, how they lived, what they wore, and how they found time for joy. These are simple things, but they make the world feel warm and real. Most people lived close to the river and grew food there. The chief crops were wheat and barley. These were turned into bread and a gentle beer that many drank with their meals. Imagine a family around a low table sharing flat loaves. The bread could be coarse or fine, salty or sweet when small cakes and dates were added. Vegetables like onions, garlic, leeks, lentils, and beans filled pots and gave steady flavor. Fruit grew in gardens: figs, dates, grapes, and pomegranates. Fish came from the Nile and was eaten fresh, dried, or salted. Meat was less common for many families, saved for feasts or special days. Birds and geese were kept in small numbers. Milk from goats and cows gave cheese and butter for those who had animals. Cooking was gentle and slow. Clay pots sat over small fires. Stews bubbled. Perfumes from herbs rose, and flat bread was baked on hot stones. A simple meal could calm a tired body after work in the fields. Food was a regular comfort and a shared ritual. It bound families to the day and to one another. Homes varied by wealth, but many houses shared common features. A small home might be a single room around a courtyard. The courtyard was the heart of the house, a cool, open space where cooking, washing, and weaving took place. Rooms opened from that square. Roofs were flat and used as extra space in hot weather. People slept on reed mats or low beds with wooden frames. Simple furniture included stools, low tables, storage chests, and woven baskets. Wealthier homes had more rooms, decorated walls, and carved furniture. Some houses had small shrines where a family left daily offerings to household gods. Clothing was made mostly from linen, a light fabric spun from flax. Linen kept people cool in the heat. Men often wore kilts or simple skirts. Women wore long dresses with straps or sleeves that flowed with their movements. Children were often unclothed in very early years and then dressed simply as they grew. Linen could be plain or finely pleated and worked by skilled weavers. Jewelry was common: beads, bracelets, amulets, and small gold pieces for those who could afford them. Jewelry was both pretty and protective. A small amulet could stand between a child and a nightmare. Many people wore wigs or styled their own hair. Wigs were made from human hair or plant fibers and kept the head cool and neat. Both men and women used makeup gently, a dark line around the eyes to reduce glare from the sun, and a soft red on the lips sometimes. Scented oils and unguents were used to keep skin soft and to add a gentle perfume. These small acts of care were part of daily routine and made life softer. Work took up most of the day. Farmers followed the seasons, plowing, planting, weeding, and harvesting along the Nile's rhythm. When the river flooded, the fields were rich, and much of the work was paused. So large, projects could take place, and so men could go to work on temples or other tasks. Craftspeople shaped the world. Potters formed clay at their wheels. Weavers kept looms busy. Carpenters carved wood, and metalworkers hammered copper and later bronze into useful tools. Each craft had its own rhythm and its own quiet pride. A potter might make dozens of jars in a week. A weaver might spend days on a fine length of linen, and a carpenter might take weeks to carve a box with careful joins. Trade and markets tied places together. Local markets were bright, with woven mats spread out and goods displayed: grains, oil, fish, cloth, beads, and small tools. People bartered and bought with small coins or by measure. If a family needed something special, a new jar, a piece of cloth, or dried fish, they went to the market and traded grain, labor, or goods. Traders walked long roads or floated on the Nile to bring in copper, cedar wood, and stones from far places. These traders made the world feel wider and filled everyday life with small treasures from afar. Children learned by watching and by helping. Play was both simple and full of skill. Toys could be little carved animals, clay dolls, or spinning tops. Children helped in fields and workshops when they were old enough. Education for the few who could read or write was strict but small in number. Scribes trained with reed pens and ink, copying texts and learning to count. Scribes were respected. They held quiet power because they kept the memory of accounts and laws. Most people learned trades from parents and neighbors, learning with hands and patient practice. Music and song were part of both work and rest. Simple songs kept rowers in time on boats and helped women pound grain. At festivals and homes, music lifted the spirit. Flutes, harps, small drums, and the soft hum of voices. Dance was common at joy and at mourning, and music tied people to each other in steady, shared moments. Games brought calm and small tension to the day. Senet, a board game played with pebbles and sticks, was beloved by many. It was played slowly, and its moves were linked with luck and fate. Game boards were made of wood or stone and could be simple or finely inlaid. Games gave people a quiet way to pass an afternoon and to share gentle competition. Health and simple medicine were part of life. Midwives helped with births, using small tools and herbs to ease labor. Simple remedies were common: poultices of herbs for wounds, oils for skin, and moss or honey for clean cuts. The idea of balance mattered, keeping the body in steady state through diet, rest, and care. Priests and doctors used a mix of practical care and prayers. For many, a visit to a temple doctor included a gentle word from the priest and an herbal recommendation. Hospitals, as we know them, were rare, but healers traveled and shared what worked. Marriage and family were central. Couples often formed bonds with both love and practical ties. Families cared for one another. Elders were respected, and children learned stories and tasks. Burial and remembrance were family acts. Leaving food and drink in a tomb kept a bond alive across time. Family ties made everyday life feel safe and tied to the future. Hunting and fishing were both work and a kind of quiet joy. Men might go out with nets and hooks to catch fish in the Nile, or head with bows outside the river to find birds and small game. Hunting was shown in art as both skill and leisure. Fishing boats drifted on early mornings, and nets were spread at slow times. The taste of a river fish, cooked simply with herbs, was one of the small comforts of life. Festivals brought bright days into the calendar. On these days, markets were fuller, songs were louder, and people traveled to temples to join processions. People carried small statues of gods through the streets, wore new clothes, and shared feasts. These days gave a break from labor and tied people to the larger stories of the land. Small acts of kindness made life gentle, sharing a loaf of bread, helping to mend a roof, or teaching a child to tie a knot. These acts kept communities tight. A neighbor might watch the house while a family traveled, or help with a harvest. These small ties were the quiet glue of life. Listen for a small scene. A woman named Merit, sitting by a courtyard wall at dusk, weaving a fine strip of linen. A child sits nearby, shaping clay with small hands. Her husband comes in from the fields, his feet dusty, and she hands him a small cup of cool beer. They speak low words, plan the morrow, and breathe in the calm of being together. Their life is ordinary, but it holds a subtle satisfaction in skill, in rest, and in the steady promise of the Nile. As we close this chapter, remember that the small, ordinary pieces of life, food, clothes, work, play, and family, are what make a civilization feel close and human. These steady things are not grand, but they are the bedrock on which stories, art, and ritual rest. In the next chapters, we will move beyond daily life to talk about trade with distant lands, the way Egypt met the outside world, and how ideas and goods traveled across deserts and seas. Stay with me. There is comfort in each next step. Chapter 9. Rivers, roads, and distant shores. Trade and contact. Breathe in slowly and let your mind open to the wide world beyond the reed beds. Imagine a boat sliding from shadow into light, its oars moving with soft, even strokes. Imagine a camel caravan moving over warm sand, its bells chiming in the hush. In this chapter, we will follow those slow paths, the rivers, the roads, and the sea lanes that connected Kemet to far places. We will meet the people who moved goods and ideas and feel how these journeys shaped daily life, craft, and power. Kemet sat in a place that made travel both easy and hard. The Nile was a smooth road for moving heavy goods up and down the country, but beyond the river lay deserts, cliffs, and wide seas. People learned to use what they had, boats on water, donkeys and camels on land, and sturdy ships for the coast. Over time, they grew a network of routes that brought wood, metal, stones, perfumes, and spices into the hands of builders, priests, and families. The most common path was the Nile itself. Boats of many shapes carried grain, pottery, people, and raw goods. A flat-bottomed barge could hold heavy blocks of stone or long planks of cedar. Sailboats could ride the wind and move quickly across water when the wind was kind. Rowers kept to a steady beat, and the captain steered by eye and by a simple sense of the river's moods. Goods moved from one town to the next, and with them came news, fashions, and small foreign objects that delighted people at the market. To the south lay Nubia, a land rich in gold, cattle, and certain woods not common in the Nile Valley. Traders and royal expeditions often moved downriver to bring back gold dust, finished metalwork, and exotic goods. Nubian gold was prized. So were skilled workers from the south who brought different ways of working with wood and stone. The link with Nubia was close and long-lived, sometimes friendly, sometimes tense, but always important to the wealth and power of Kemet. To the northeast, across deserts and over the sea, were lands that supplied cedar wood, resin, and fine timber. Cedar was especially valuable because it could be carved into doors, coffins, and beams that lasted. Timber could come by sea, floated in from distant coasts, or moved overland by caravan. Resin and incense came from remote places where special trees grew. People burned these fragrant substances in temples and homes. The smell of incense was part of prayer and also a sign of prestige. Small boxes of incense, jars of oil, and fragrant unguents moved like quiet treasures through markets and temple storerooms. The sea opened a wider door. Egyptian ships sailed along coasts and across channels to reach islands and distant ports. Seafaring could be slow and changeful, depending on wind and weather, but it brought things that the river could not: exotic animals, fine woods, and luxury goods. Traders who knew the ways of the sea became small islands of expertise. They read the sky, the currents, and the birds to find land. Farther away lay the fabled land called Punt. Voyages to Punt were not ordinary errands. They were special expeditions, sometimes led by the king or queen. Ships returned from Punt carrying frankincense and myrrh, the fragrant gums used for temple offerings, as well as ivory, exotic birds, and rare woods. These goods smelled of other places and made their way into royal houses and temple treasuries. The return of such ships was a festival of its own, a time when people gathered to see strange cargo and to give thanks for safe travel. Trade was organized in many ways. The state often led large expeditions. A king might send a fleet to bring back cedar for a temple or gold for a tomb. Temples themselves were powerful economic centers and could send or fund voyages to gather materials. At the same time, smaller private traders moved goods by caravan and by boat, taking grain, cloth, and craft goods to market in exchange for foreign items. Markets and ports were places of noise and color, long tables with baskets of dates, men calling the quality of cloth, small boys running with bundles, and foreigners showing bright beads and strange shapes. Merchants learned to count and to keep records. Scribes kept lists of what came and went. We can imagine the quiet scene of a small office where a scribe marks down a charge and a delivery, the reed pen scratching on a surface as the trader nods. These records helped ensure fair trade, collect taxes, and manage temple stores. The need to count and keep track made writing more useful and more important in daily life. Trade brought new crafts and skills. When wood from far away arrived, carpenters learned new joints and new ways to shape furniture. When glass beads and metalwork came from distant lands, local craftsmen tried to copy them, changing their style and methods. Foreign craftsmen sometimes stayed. They set up workshops and shared secrets of their craft. Over time, the look of things changed a little, picking up quiet notes from other lands. A piece of jewelry might show a small design from far away, a pattern that a visitor taught a local artist. Trade was also a way to make friends and allies. Gifts between rulers could secure peace. A king sending gifts to a neighboring ruler was a quiet promise. I will trade with you. I will keep friendly ties. But trade could bring tension too. Control of a rich mine or caravan route could lead to clashes. Some points of contact changed slowly into military action when leaders decided to secure what they wanted by force. Yet for most people, trade felt like the arrival of new things. A rare cloth for a festival, a tool that made work easier, or a small statue that carried a new story. Markets were places where people learned about the wider world. A jar of perfume might have a smell that no one had before. A bead could show a color made with a new stone. Children at the market touched these goods and imagined distant places. For them, trade was a quiet lesson in how wide the world could be. Not all goods were luxury. Simple materials that improved daily life also moved in trade. Metal for tools made farming easier. New pigments for paint brightened tomb walls. Bits of wood and iron could be turned into hoes and knives. These small items mattered as much as exotic imports. They changed labor, food production, and the look of homes. A small story brings this near. A trader named Sabu returns from a southern voyage. His barge is full of fine, dark wood. He walks off the ramp and smells the sweet, resinous scent of the timber. In the market, he meets a carpenter named Horim, who has been saving grain and time to buy cedar. The two men make a quiet deal. Sabu will trade 3 small jars of oil and some beads for a carved beam that Horim will make into a family chest. When Horim opens the chest months later, he keeps a small token, a bead from Sabu's cargo, as a soft reminder of the river, the long trip, and the circle of hands that made the village feel part of a bigger world. Trade also shaped how people valued things. Metals like gold and copper held both simple uses and deep meaning. Gold shone like the sun and was used in temples and jewelry. Copper and bronze made better tools and weapons. Stone from distant quarries made strong statues. All these materials built the world that kings and priests shaped, and they also eased the ordinary work of farmers, carpenters, and potters. As this chapter settles, think of the soft sound of waves against a boat hull and the slow steps of a camel over dunes. Trade braided Kemet into a wider web. It gave new smells, colors, sounds, and tastes to villages and temples. It taught new skills, brought new friends, and sometimes caused new conflicts. In the chapters to come, we will watch how power moves across borders, how armies come and go, and how foreign rulers sometimes ruled within Kemet. We will also listen to the deep echoes of these exchanges in art, language, and thought. Chapter 10. Warfare and Defense. Take a slow breath and let your body relax as we move into a quieter look at war and defense. Even in a calm land like Kemet, people had to protect their homes, their fields, and their rulers. War was not only loud battles, it was also about walls, plans, careful moves, and the steady work of people who kept the land safe. In this chapter, we will walk softly through how Kemet prepared for danger, how armies were formed, and how defense shaped life for many people. Armies in Kemet began simply. At first, most fighting was local. Men who farmed together could be called to stand with spears when raiders came. Over time, kings formed more permanent groups for defense. These groups could be trained to move as one, to use bows well, and to set up camp quickly. Training was steady and repeated. Young men practiced shooting arrows, running with a shield, and moving in rows. This steady practice made small forces into stronger groups that could face larger problems. The bow was a very important weapon. A skilled archer could strike from a distance and change the shape of a fight. Archers used several kinds of bows. Simple bows were easy to make and fast to shoot. Composite bows, later used in Kemet, were built of layers of wood, horn, and glue. They were harder to make, but they were stronger and could fire farther. Bow makers learned their craft like potters or carpenters, with careful tools and steady hands. Spears and javelins were used for close fighting and for throwing. A spear could be used like a walking stick and then quickly used in battle. Shields came in many sizes. Heavy shields gave good protection, but were harder to move with. Light shields allowed more speed. Stones and slings were also common. A sling could throw a small stone very far when the slinger spun it with a steady rhythm. These simple tools were often as useful as larger weapons. Later, chariots changed war. A chariot was a small two-wheeled cart pulled by horses. It carried a driver and a warrior who shot arrows or threw spears. Chariots moved fast and could break enemy lines. Building chariots took skill. Good wood, leatherwork, and wheels made strong enough to bear speed. Horses were not common at first. They were brought from outside and needed care, training, and feed. The chariot made some battles look like speed and grace on the plain, but it also required many people to care for the animals and the craft. Fortifications and town walls were another calm but steady form of defense. Walls slowed attackers and gave people time to prepare. Towers gave guards a higher view to see danger from far away. Gates were carefully built and guarded because they were weak points that needed watchful hands. Near the river, simple embankments and dikes also served a defensive role. Controlling water and protecting fields, they could make it harder for enemies who tried to move by boat. Ships and the river played a double role. The Nile was a road, but also a line that needed watching. Patrol boats moved along the river to watch for raiders and thieves. In coastal areas, larger ships could be armed. Control of the river and the coast meant watching trade and thinking ahead. Naval skill was a quiet art, knowing when to move, where to hide, and how to bring goods and soldiers safely along water. Defense was not only about arms and walls, it was also about plans and choices. Kings used scouts and messengers to learn where danger might come. Spies and scouts quietly reported on the paths of raiders or the movement of distant armies. Messages were carried on boats, by runners, or by fast riders. Planning kept people safe because it allowed leaders to move grain, close gates, and call soldiers before trouble arrived. There was also diplomacy, the calmer side of war. Kings often tried to avoid battle by making deals, giving gifts, or arranging marriages. Sending a gift of gold or fine cloth could buy peace. Treaties and pacts were ways to keep trade flowing. Diplomacy was patient and clever. It used promises, trade, and shared interests to bind people together without bloodshed. Many rulers preferred trade and talk when they could, for war cost grain, lives, and calm. The cost of war was real. When fields went untended because men were away fighting, families had less food. Building walls, feeding soldiers, and caring for horses took grain and time. Communities sometimes paid heavy taxes to support long campaigns. These costs meant that war shaped not only political borders, but also the daily life of ordinary people. In hard times, families tightened their belts and shared what little they had. Still, many soldiers returned to their home life after campaigns. In quiet seasons, they farmed, built, and made things. Veterans carried stories of travel and taught their sons skills they had learned. Some soldiers rose into local power because they had skill and experience. This blending of soldier and worker showed how defense was woven into the fabric of life. A small, calm story will help you imagine the human side. Picture a young man named Paddy who learns to shoot a bow in the field. He joins a small force to defend a mountain pass from raiders. The march is steady and slow. Paddy sleeps on his back under the stars, his shield close by, and wakes to the sound of birds. The force watches the road, and when danger comes, they meet it with steady hearts. After the danger passes, Paddy returns home and helps harvest. He keeps the memory of the march like a quiet scar and a lesson. The skills he learned make his life stronger, but the march also taught him how much he loves the slow peace of his village. As this chapter ends, know that defense in Kemet was a mixture of watchful care, craft, planning, and human stories. It was not only about great battles, it was about small acts of watchfulness that kept river and field safe. In the next chapters, we will look at the lives of women and children, at education and tuning a voice into writing, and at how ideas of justice and law grew slowly in this calm land. Each chapter will keep a gentle pace, so we may learn more without ever hurrying. Chapter 11: The Role of Women and Family in Ancient Egypt. Take a deep breath and imagine the soft sound of morning in an Egyptian courtyard. The light is gentle, golden, and warm as it falls through the reeds. You can hear the low chatter of women preparing bread, the hum of a lullaby being sung to a child, and the distant sound of water splashing in clay jars as someone fills them by the riverbank. Tonight, we will step quietly into the homes and hearts of the women of Kemet, mothers, daughters, wives, queens, priestesses, and workers. We will see how their roles shaped families, culture, and even the kingdom itself. Women in ancient Egypt lived with a measure of freedom and respect that was rare in many other ancient societies. They could own property, run businesses, inherit wealth, and even represent themselves in legal matters. They were not hidden from the world, nor were they without voice. In the calm rhythm of daily life, women were both the keepers of the home and the heartbeat of society. Imagine a woman named Nefru. She rises early when the air is still cool and filled with the faint smell of baking bread. Her husband tends to work in the fields, and her children sleep on low mats nearby. She grinds grain between two stones, her hands moving with quiet strength. Later, she kneads dough, sets it near the fire, and prepares beer from barley, a light, nourishing drink for her family. Her tasks may seem simple, yet each one holds meaning. She is the thread that binds the household together. She cleans, cooks, and weaves linen on her loom. When her husband returns at sunset, she serves him food, listens to his words, and tells stories to their children before they sleep. In her daily rhythm, there is peace and purpose, the calm pulse of Egyptian life itself. But not all women lived the same. Some were artisans, musicians, midwives, or merchants. In towns and cities, women sold goods at the market: fish, linen, perfumes, baskets, and pottery. Others worked as dancers or musicians in temples and festivals, bringing joy and beauty to the people. Wealthier women might manage servants, estates, and family lands. They kept accounts, balanced ledgers, and made sure that what was sown was also harvested. And then there were the women of the temples, priestesses who served the gods with devotion and ritual precision. These women were respected and often well educated. They learned chants, songs, and the meanings of sacred texts. Some performed purification rituals, others tended the shrines or played music during ceremonies. In service to the divine, they were considered pure and powerful, their voices lifting prayers that carried through marble halls scented with incense. Marriage was an important bond in Egypt, but it was often practical and based on mutual respect rather than control. Both partners contributed to the family's stability. Women could choose to marry and could also divorce if the relationship failed. Divorce carried no deep shame. Property and wealth were divided fairly, and children remained cherished by both parents. In Egyptian law, women had the same legal stand-in as men. They could appear in court, buy or sell land, and sign contracts in their own names. This independence was extraordinary in the ancient world and gave Egyptian women a quiet dignity. Their worth was not measured only by their husbands or fathers, but also by their own name and deeds. Education for girls varied. Daughters of wealthy families could be taught to read, write, and handle household accounts. Most girls, however, learned from their mothers how to cook, weave, keep a home, and prepare offerings for the household shrine. Knowledge was passed through gentle conversation, through repetition, and through example. A girl watched her mother and learned how to move through the world with grace and wisdom. Women's appearance also reflected the values of harmony and balance. Linen dresses, light, flowing, and white, kept them cool in the sun. Jewelry, often made of bright beads, gold, and semi-precious stones, added color and beauty. Kohl lined their eyes to protect against the sun and to give an elegant, calm gaze. Scented oils kept the skin soft, and perfumes of lotus and myrrh lingered wherever they passed. Beauty was not vanity in Kemet. It was seen as part of balance and divine order, a reflection of the goddess who lived in all things. Above all, women stood the great queens and goddesses who embodied the power of life and creation. Queens like Nefertari, Hatshepsut, and Nefertiti were not simply wives of kings. They were rulers, advisors, and symbols of divine harmony. Hatshepsut even ruled as pharaoh, wearing the royal crown and beard, leading armies, and building temples. Her reign was one of peace and prosperity, proving that leadership and wisdom were not bound by gender. And then there were the goddesses: Isis, the devoted mother and healer; Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty, and music; Sekhmet, fierce and protective; Ma'at, who represented truth and justice; and Nut, the sky mother who stretched above the world, her body filled with stars. These divine figures were woven into the spiritual life of every woman. To live kindly, to nurture life, to keep order in the home. these were ways of living in harmony with the goddesses themselves. Children were the treasures of the home. Families loved them deeply. Mothers often carried their babies in slings while working, humming soft songs that echoed the rhythm of the Nile. Fathers taught sons to fish, carve, and plow. Daughters learned to grind grain, weave linen, and make offerings. There was laughter in the courtyards, small quarrels, and gentle lessons that shaped each new generation. When a child fell ill, prayers and charms were used alongside practical care. Mothers whispered spells to ward off harm, drew protective symbols on amulets, and offered food to household gods for health and safety. Family was not just blood, it was protection, care, and spiritual unity. Even in death, family ties remained strong. Women played an important role in mourning and burial rituals. They washed the body, wrapped it in linen, and performed the lament of Isis and Nephthys, a song of farewell that promised rebirth and peace. To mourn was to love deeply, and through these acts, women helped souls pass into eternity. Let us pause and picture a moment in time, a sunset in Thebes. A mother sits outside her home, spinning flax into thread. Her daughter sits beside her, watching her hands move in circles. They speak softly, their words blending with the hum of insects and the distant call of water birds. The girl asks about the stars, and the mother explains how the goddess Nut spreads her body across the sky, protecting all life beneath her. The child listens, her eyes wide, and when the first stars appear, she feels safe, wrapped in the soft light of her mother's voice and the ancient comfort of her land. Women in Kemet were the quiet keepers of continuity. They raised the next generation, maintained the home, managed the economy, and served in temples. Their lives might seem humble, but they held the weight of the world's balance, just as the goddess Mahat held her feather of truth. As we end this chapter, let us remember that the story of Egypt is not only about kings and pyramids. It is also about mothers and daughters, wives and sisters, priestesses and queens, those who nurtured life, kept peace, and passed wisdom down through the centuries. In our next chapter, we will move into the world of knowledge, where we will explore how the ancient Egyptians taught, learned, and wrote. We will discover the birth of writing, the education of scribes, and the way words shaped both history and eternity. Take a breath. Let the sound of the river return to your thoughts, and rest easy in the calm of the story that continues. Chapter 12. The schools of scribes and the art of writing. The night deepens softly over the Nile. The stars glimmer like ink droplets scattered across the dark sky, and the air is warm with the faint scent of papyrus and the river's mist. In the stillness of ancient Egypt, where so much was built to endure forever, one thing above all granted immortality: words. Tonight, we journey into the world of Egyptian writing, learning, and the people who preserved knowledge for thousands of years, the scribes. In the land of Kemet, writing was a sacred act. It was not only a tool for communication, but a bridge between the human and divine. The Egyptians believed that words carried power. A spoken name, a written prayer, or a carved inscription could bring life, preserve memory, or call upon the gods. Every word written was a thread in the tapestry of eternity. Writing began long ago, around 3100 BCE, near the time of Egypt's first kings. At first it was simple, pictures scratched into pottery and temple walls. But slowly, these pictures grew more complex. They became symbols, then ideas, then sounds. This was the birth of hieroglyphs, the sacred carvings. Each symbol could represent a sound, a word, or a concept. To read them was to read the thoughts of the gods. Imagine walking through a temple corridor. The walls are alive with carved hieroglyphs, falcons, ankhs, eyes, lotus flowers, and spirals. The colors are bright: red, blue, gold, and green. Every sign tells a part of a story, a prayer for the afterlife, a record of a king's deeds, or a hymn to the sun. It's beautiful to look at, but to understand it takes years of discipline. Only the scribes knew how to unlock this world of meaning. Scribes were among the most respected people in ancient Egypt. They were not warriors or priests, but their power lay in knowledge, the ability to record life itself. Every law, trade, tax, story, and prayer passed through their hands. Without scribes, there would have been no record of the pharaohs, no preserved myths, no administration for the kingdom. They were the keepers of memory. The path to becoming a scribe began in childhood. Boys, and sometimes girls, were chosen for their intelligence and patience. Their education started early, often in temple schools or scribal houses known as the House of Life. The air in these schools was filled with the rustle of papyrus, the scratch of reed pens, and the steady voice of teachers reciting lessons. Picture a classroom along the banks of the Nile. The morning light filters through the open doorway. A group of young students sits cross-legged on mats, holding small wooden boards coated with plaster. Each has a reed pen dipped in black or red ink. Their teacher, a stern man in a linen robe, walks slowly between them. On the wall hangs a copy of a sacred text, perhaps a passage from the instructions of Ptahhotep, a guide filled with wisdom about truth, kindness, and humility. The students practice writing lines from it. Do not be proud because of your knowledge. Speak only when you know you can teach. Over and over, they copy it, their handwriting shaky at first, then stronger. Hours pass in silence, broken only by the sound of reeds scratching and the quiet sigh of concentration. The Egyptian writing system had many layers. Hieroglyphs were the most beautiful, used for monuments, tombs, and temples. But there was also a simpler form called hieratic, used for everyday documents like letters, trade records, and stories. Later came demotic, an even faster script for daily writing. Each required skill, patience, and a trained eye. Ink was made from soot and plants, mixed carefully with water. Papyrus, Egypt's gift to the world, came from the tall reeds that grew along the Nile. Strips were cut, pressed, and dried into smooth sheets. A single roll could hold pages of stories, prayers, or laws. It was light and durable, and it allowed Egypt's wisdom to travel across generations. To the Egyptians, writing was a divine act. They believed the god Thoth, depicted as a man with the head of an ibis, had given writing to humanity. Thoth was the god of wisdom, time, and the moon, and he recorded every event that happened in heaven and on earth. Scribes prayed to him before beginning their work, asking for clarity and steady hands. In temples, sacred scribes recorded rituals, prayers, and the names of the gods. Every symbol had to be drawn perfectly, for a single mistake could change its meaning. In royal tombs, scribes carved words meant to guide souls through the afterlife. These texts, like the Book of the Dead, described the journey of the soul through the underworld, filled with spells and passwords to help the spirit find peace. But scribes did not only work for temples, they also served in the palace, helping manage Egypt's vast bureaucracy. They counted grain, measured land, recorded taxes, and kept track of labor for building projects. Their accuracy kept the kingdom running smoothly. A scribe's pen was as mighty as a soldier's sword, though its battle was fought on parchment instead of the field. The life of a scribe could be demanding, but it was also filled with pride. They knew they were guardians of knowledge. Ancient Egyptian proverbs even said, "The scribe's calling is greater than all others." Unlike farmers or laborers, scribes were free from heavy physical work. They were educated, respected, and often rose to high positions in government. Still, their training was strict, discipline was harsh, mistakes were corrected with both words, and sometimes punishment. A young student could spend years copying texts before being allowed to write official records. Their exercises included lists of words, names of gods, and proverbs teaching good behavior. Through repetition, they learned not only language, but moral wisdom. Writing also connected Egypt to the afterlife. When a person's name was written, it was believed their spirit lived on. This is why names were carved into tombs and monuments, to ensure that one's ka, or life force, would never be forgotten. To erase a name, on the other hand, was to erase a soul. That is why ancient Egyptians feared having their names destroyed. It meant eternal silence. Beyond the formal schools and temple halls, the art of writing also shaped culture and imagination. There were stories, fables, and myths written for both entertainment and wisdom. One famous tale, the story of Sinu, tells of a court official who flees Egypt in fear after the death of his king, lives in exile, and finally returns home seeking forgiveness. It's a story of loyalty, fear, and redemption, written almost 4,000 years ago, yet still filled with human emotion. There were also love poems written on papyrus or pottery shards, describing the beauty of the beloved and the joy of affection. Some were playful, others deeply romantic. They showed that even in a world of gods and kings, people loved, dreamed, and longed, just as we do today. In libraries and temples, collections of scrolls were kept, containing hymns, spells, histories, and medicine. The greatest of these libraries may have been at the Temple of Ra in Heliopolis, where scholars and priests gathered to study the mysteries of the heavens and the earth. These were the seeds of learning that would later inspire Greece and Rome, carried across time through Egypt's written words. As night deepens, imagine a scribe sitting under a small oil lamp. The flame flickers softly as he writes. His reed pen dips into black ink. Line by line, he records the stories of his people, names, prayers, laws, and dreams. Outside, the Nile flows endlessly, reflecting the stars above. He pauses for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the world, and smiles. He knows that what he writes tonight may live forever. In this way, Egypt's scribes became immortal. Their words, etched in stone and ink, still speak to us thousands of years later. Through them, we hear the laughter of ancient classrooms, the chants of temple priests, and the heartbeat of a civilization that believed knowledge could conquer time. As this chapter ends, let the echo of the reed pen guide your thoughts. Slow, patient, steady. For in the world of ancient Egypt, to write was to live twice, and the story, like the river, flows ever onward. In our next chapter, we will drift deeper into the realm of belief, where magic, medicine, and science met in harmony. We will explore how the Egyptians healed body and spirit, and how they saw health as a balance between the physical and the divine. Chapter 13. The Healers of the Nile: Medicine, Magic, and the Art of Life. The night drifts gently onward. The Nile glimmers under the faint silver light of the moon, moving slowly and quietly, just as the breath moves through a sleeping body. In this peaceful stillness, we enter another side of ancient Egypt, one not filled with pyramids or temples, but with the steady hands of healers, the whispers of prayers, and the deep belief that life, body, and spirit were one. The Egyptians were among the earliest people to study the body with care and curiosity. To them, health was not simply the absence of illness, it was balance. Balance between the forces of nature, the harmony of the body, and the order of the universe, known as Ma'at. When that balance was disturbed, sickness appeared. Healing, then, was the act of restoring harmony to the body and the soul. Imagine walking into a small chamber in ancient Thebes, its walls painted with calming scenes of lotus flowers and flowing water. A healer, perhaps an old man with steady eyes and kind hands, sits by a wooden table. On it lies a collection of jars and small pouches filled with herbs: honey, frankincense, garlic, myrrh, and crushed plants gathered from the banks of the Nile. Nearby, a young assistant grinds dried ingredients on a flat stone, mixing them into pastes and oils. This was the heart of Egyptian medicine, a blend of observation, natural remedies, and spiritual guidance. The healers believed that every part of the body had a spiritual counterpart. The body was not seen as a collection of organs, but as a sacred vessel, connected to the gods. To heal a wound or an illness meant working with both the physical and the divine. Egyptian doctors were called Sunu. They were trained professionals, often educated in temple schools where medicine, science, and religion merged into one. Their training was long and disciplined. Many came from the houses of life, centers of knowledge often attached to temples where they studied anatomy, herbs, and the art of incantation. There they learned to examine patients, diagnose symptoms, and prepare treatments. Surprisingly, many of their methods were practical and advanced for their time. They understood how to clean wounds with honey, a natural antiseptic. They used moldy bread to fight infection long before modern science discovered penicillin. They performed simple surgeries, set broken bones, stitched cuts, and even practiced dentistry. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts known, offers a window into this world. Written around 1550 BCE, it contains over 700 remedies and spells. Some are purely medical, describing how to treat burns, stomach pain, and infections. Others combine physical cures with prayers and magic, reminding us that, in ancient Egypt, science and spirituality walked hand in hand. For example, a treatment for asthma involved heating herbs on a brick and inhaling the fumes, a primitive form of steam therapy. For headaches, mixtures of herbs and oils were rubbed on the temples, while charms were recited to drive away evil spirits. For dental pain, a paste of dried fruit and natron was applied to the gums. Some remedies worked, others were symbolic, but all were offered with faith in the unseen powers of healing. The Egyptians also had a detailed understanding of the pulse. They believed that the heart was the center of all bodily functions, not only the source of life, but also the seat of thought, emotion, and the soul. The Sunu often placed their fingers on a patient's wrist or chest, feeling the rhythm of the heart to understand the flow of life within. One text describes it poetically. There are vessels to every limb. If a physician places his fingers on the head, on the hands, or on the feet, he measures the heart, for it speaks in every part of the body. It was their way of listening to the music of life itself. But alongside the practical doctors stood another kind of healer, the priest-physician. These men and women served in the temples of gods like Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of healing and war, and Thoth, the god of wisdom. Their healing came not through herbs or ointments, but through prayer, ritual, and the power of words. They used amulets carved with sacred symbols, often shaped like the Ankh, the sign of life, or the Eye of Horus, believed to protect and restore health. The patient might wear the amulet or drink water poured over it, which was thought to absorb divine power. The priest would recite a series of incantations, calling upon the gods to cleanse the body and drive out the spirit of disease. In some cases, a single treatment might blend both approaches, the doctor's medicine and the priest's prayer. For the Egyptians, there was no conflict between science and faith. Both were simply tools to bring life back into harmony. Among the many deities of healing, one figure stands out, Imhotep. He lived around 2600 BCE and served as the architect of the step pyramid of Djoser. But Imhotep was also a physician, philosopher, and scholar. Centuries after his death, he was deified, worshipped as a god of medicine and wisdom. People prayed to him for healing, leaving offerings at his temples. He became Egypt's version of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, and his name was remembered with deep reverence for millennia. Another important aspect of Egyptian healing was the connection between medicine and magic. They believed that illness could sometimes be caused by spiritual forces, curses, evil spirits, or angered gods. In those cases, a healer would perform rituals to speak to the illness, commanding it to leave. Words were medicine. Spells were as essential as herbs. The healer might whisper to the patient, come forth, you who cause pain. Leave this body, for it belongs to Ra and to the light." Dreams, too, were considered sacred messages. In the temples of Serapis and Imhotep, the sick would sleep overnight, hoping the god would appear in their dreams to reveal a cure. The priests interpreted these dreams, offering remedies or rituals based on what the patient saw. This practice, known as incubation, was one of the earliest forms of dream therapy, blending psychology, faith, and medicine into one gentle art. Cleanliness was also a cornerstone of Egyptian health. Bathing was a daily ritual, often in the cool waters of the Nile, or using jars of scented oils. Temples and homes alike were kept tidy, and priests shaved their heads and bodies to remain pure. Perfumed oils, incense, and natron were used not only for beauty, but for hygiene, keeping both body and spirit clean. Their knowledge extended even to the animal world. Veterinarians cared for cattle, donkeys, and birds, understanding that the health of animals was tied to the prosperity of the people. The same respect for life that guided human medicine applied to all living creatures. Women, too, played an important role in healing. Some served as midwives and nurses, helping bring new life into the world. Childbirth was sacred and dangerous, and women turned to goddesses like Taweret, a hippo-shaped goddess who guarded mothers and infants for protection. amulets of Taweret and the frog goddess Heket were placed near beds to ensure safe delivery. When death was near and no cure could be found, Egyptian healers turned their focus toward peace and preparation for the journey beyond. They comforted the sick with prayers, perfumed oils, and music, helping them accept the next stage of existence with grace. For them, death was not an end, but a continuation, a passage into another form of life. In this way, Egyptian medicine was more than science. It was a philosophy. It taught that health was a reflection of balance and that harmony between the body, the spirit, and the universe was the key to well-being. As the night deepens, picture once more the healer by the Nile. The flame of an oil lamp flickers as he grinds herbs in silence. The sound of the pestle is soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. He whispers a prayer to Thoth, mixes the powder with honey, and gently applies it to a wound. Outside, frogs sing, and the water glows beneath the moon. The healer looks up, his face calm, his spirit steady. In his eyes, there is no fear, only understanding. He knows that life and death, sickness and health, are all part of the same eternal cycle. That, perhaps, was the greatest medicine of all: peace with the rhythm of existence. In our next chapter, we will explore another side of Egyptian wisdom, the sacred animals of Kemet, and how each creature was seen as a living symbol of the divine. From cats to crocodiles, from ibises to jackals, every being had a place in the cosmic order of life. For now, rest your thoughts like a papyrus scroll gently rolled and tied, ready for the next dawn. The river flows softly, and Egypt's ancient wisdom whispers still. Chapter 14: The Sacred Animals of Egypt, Messengers Between Worlds. The night hums softly over the desert. The moonlight drapes the dunes in silver, and from the shadows near the Nile's edge, the gentle rustle of reeds can be heard. In ancient Egypt, this sound, the quiet movement of life, was sacred. The people of Kemet did not see animals as separate from themselves, nor as creatures of mere instinct. To them, animals were living reflections of divine power, symbols through which the gods spoke, guided, and protected the world. Egypt was a land alive with creatures. The Nile teemed with fish, crocodiles, and hippos. The deserts echoed with the call of jackals, the flap of vultures, and the quiet steps of cats stalking in the moonlight. Every bird, beast, and insect carried a story, a lesson, or a divine essence. To the Egyptians, these beings were not random parts of nature. They were sacred forms of energy, manifestations of the gods who shaped existence itself. Let us walk gently into this world, a world where the line between the human and the animal was not a wall, but a flowing river of understanding. One of the most beloved creatures in ancient Egypt was the cat. Sleek, silent, and graceful, cats were seen as protectors of the home. They kept away snakes, rodents, and evil spirits, moving with calm precision through the night. To the Egyptians, this grace was divine. They associated cats with the goddess Bastet, a powerful yet gentle deity who embodied both love and protection. Bastet was depicted as a woman with the head of a cat, or sometimes a full cat adorned with golden jewelry. She represented warmth, family, fertility, and joy. But like all Egyptian deities, she carried balance within her, for she was also a fierce defender, capable of striking down threats with claws of divine justice. In homes, families kept small statues of Bastet to guard against misfortune. When a cat died, its loss was mourned deeply, and sometimes even mummified as an offering to Bastet. The Egyptians loved cats so dearly that harming one, even by accident, was considered a serious crime. Ancient Greek visitors once wrote of how Egyptians would weep and shave their eyebrows in mourning when their family cat passed away. It was said that Bastet's spirit lived in every feline, moving softly between this world and the divine. But Bastet was not the only animal deity to hold such power. Let's move next to another, more formidable guardian, the falcon. High above the Nile's fertile valley, the falcon soared, sharp-eyed and strong. It was the bird of Horus, the sky god, and symbol of kingship itself. Horus was depicted as a man with a falcon's head, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. His eyes represented the sun and the moon, eternal watchers over the land. The falcon's flight inspired the idea of divine kingship. Pharaohs were believed to be earthly manifestations of Horus, protectors of balance, order, and justice. On temple walls, carvings of falcons spread their wings over the heads of kings, shielding them from harm. The very act of flight was seen as sacred, a reminder that power must be balanced with vision and clarity. The Egyptians also found deep symbolism in the ibis, the long-legged bird with a curved beak that waded gracefully through the shallows. This bird was the symbol of Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and time. Thoth was the divine scribe who recorded the judgments of the dead, measured the movements of the stars, and guided both gods and men toward truth. Thousands of sacred ibises were mummified and placed in temples dedicated to Thoth. The priests of Hermopolis, where his great temple stood, cared for the birds as holy messengers. When an ibis died, it was wrapped carefully in linen, sealed in a jar, and buried with prayers of gratitude. The Egyptians believed the ibis carried Thoth's presence, a symbol of thought, balance, and the order of the universe. Moving to the waters of the Nile, we encounter two creatures that inspired both awe and fear: the crocodile and the hippopotamus. The crocodile, powerful and silent, was the embodiment of Sobek, the god of strength, fertility, and protection. Sobek's temples often stood near marshlands, and living crocodiles were sometimes kept within sacred pools. The priests would feed and care for them, adorning them with gold jewelry. When these crocodiles died, they too were mummified, honored as sacred vessels of Sobek's energy. Sobek was seen as both protector and destroyer, much like the river itself. He was the one who made the Nile's waters fertile and rich, but he could also unleash its deadly floods. Soldiers often prayed to Sobek before going into battle, asking for his courage and strength. The hippopotamus, on the other hand, carried dual meanings. To farmers, hippos were dangerous. Their massive bodies could crush crops and overturn boats. Yet, in the spiritual world, they symbolized powerful protection. The goddess Taweret, guardian of mothers and children, took the form of a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright, her face gentle but firm. Taweret was the defender of birth. She kept away evil spirits that sought to harm women during childbirth. Amulets of her image were worn by expectant mothers, hung over beds, and carved into household shrines. In her, we see the Egyptian view of nature's duality, strength that nurtures and gentleness that defends. Even the scarab beetle held a sacred place in Egyptian thought. The scarab, or dung beetle, was admired for rolling its ball of mud, a small act that mirrored the movement of the sun across the sky. The Egyptians saw in this tiny creature the work of Khepri, the morning aspect of the sun god Ra, who pushed the rising sun into the heavens each day. Scarabs became one of the most common amulets in Egypt, representing rebirth, transformation, and eternal renewal. They were placed over the hearts of the dead during mummification, ensuring that the soul would awaken again with the dawn. To wear a scarab was to carry the promise of light after darkness. In the barren deserts, another sacred figure roamed, the jackal. Mysterious and ever-present near tombs, the jackal was linked to Anubis, god of mummification and guardian of the dead. His sleek, black form symbolized both death and protection. Anubis was believed to guide souls through the underworld, weighing their hearts against the feather of Ma'at, truth and balance. The jackal's role as scavenger gave it a unique spiritual meaning. It walked the edges of life and death, guarding the transition between worlds. When Egyptians buried their loved ones, they prayed to Anubis for safe passage, trusting that the jackal-headed god would guide them through the shadows to eternal peace. Cows were also held in deep reverence. The goddess Hathor, often depicted as a cow or as a woman with cow horns and a solar disk, represented love, beauty, music, and motherhood. She was known as the Lady of the Sycamore, a goddess who nurtured both the living and the dead. In temples dedicated to her, sacred cows were tended carefully and given offerings of milk, flowers, and fruit. Even animals we might overlook, frogs, snakes, and cats, carried meaning. The frog, abundant after the Nile's flooding, symbolized fertility and new life. The snake represented both danger and wisdom, linked to the cobra goddess Wadjet, protector of Lower Egypt. Her image adorned the Pharaoh's crown, always ready to strike at enemies of order and truth. To the Egyptians, animals were teachers. They reminded humans of divine qualities, the courage of a lion, the patience of a cat, the devotion of an ibis, the wisdom of a serpent. Their presence kept the spiritual world alive in the physical one. Temples, too, reflected this harmony. At Kam Ambo, a temple stood dedicated to both Sobek and Horus, the crocodile and the falcon, predator and protector. Opposite forces united under one roof. This was Egypt's great secret, balance in all things. The destructive and the divine were two halves of one eternal whole. In daily life, Egyptians cared deeply for animals. They fed sacred birds, rescued stray cats, and even buried beloved pets with rituals. Some tombs show scenes of families with their dogs, named and remembered forever. These bonds remind us that, even thousands of years ago, love and empathy reached beyond species. As the night quiets further, imagine the sounds of Egypt's sacred creatures, the hoot of an owl, the soft purr of a cat, the distant roar of a lion echoing across the sand. Each sound, to an ancient Egyptian, was a whisper from the gods, a reminder that life spoke through every living form. In the soft rhythm of this understanding, humanity found its connection to all creation. And as we listen to the night, perhaps we too can feel it, that same harmony between the human heart and the pulse of the natural world. In our next chapter, we will drift into another deep mystery, the concept of the Ka and the Ba, the Egyptian understanding of the soul. We'll explore how they saw life, death, and eternity, and how their belief in the soul shaped everything from their tombs to their temples. For now, let your mind rest in the quiet company of Egypt's sacred creatures, gentle guardians of balance, wisdom, and life itself. Chapter 15. The Pharaohs, living gods of the Nile. As we drift deeper into the heart of Egypt's long and luminous history, we arrive at the age of the Pharaohs, those who ruled the land not merely as kings, but as living gods. Their names are etched into the sands of eternity, whispered by the desert winds, and carried upon the calm ripples of the Nile. For over 3,000 years, Egypt's rulers reigned over one of the most powerful and enduring civilizations in human history, their rule guided by divine purpose and upheld by elaborate rituals that tied the world of man to the realm of the gods. When an Egyptian looked upon the pharaoh, they did not see an ordinary man. They saw Horus, the falcon god of the sky, in human form. The pharaoh was believed to be the bridge between heaven and earth, a sacred being tasked with maintaining Ma'at, the divine balance of the universe. Everything, the rise of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, the prosperity of the land, depended on this balance, and to keep it, the pharaoh had to rule wisely, perform sacred rituals, and protect Egypt from chaos. From the first great rulers of the Old Kingdom, like Djoser and Sneferu, to the legendary figures of later dynasties, Ramses, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and Cleopatra, each pharaoh left behind a story written in stone and spirit. Some ruled in times of peace, building monuments that kissed the heavens. Others ruled in times of war, defending Egypt's borders from invaders and expanding its influence deep into Africa and the Levant. Yet all were bound by one shared belief, that they were not merely leaders, but chosen vessels of divine will. Imagine standing in the great court of Karnak Temple. The air hums with the murmur of priests, the scent of incense curling into the air as sunlight streams down between towering columns carved with hieroglyphs. The pharaoh enters, adorned in gold and lapis, the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt gleaming upon his head. His every movement is slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The people kneel, not only before their ruler, but before the living embodiment of Egypt's gods. This was not simple obedience, it was faith. To serve the pharaoh was to serve the gods themselves. The power of the pharaoh was not limited to the throne. It extended into every part of Egyptian life, religion, politics, art, and even the afterlife. The pharaoh was expected to build temples for the gods, ensure the land's prosperity, and lead in battle if necessary. Yet, he was also seen as a caretaker, a protector of the people. Many decrees carved on temple walls reveal moments of compassion. Pharaohs reducing taxes, feeding the hungry, or commissioning irrigation projects to ensure the Nile's blessings reached even the smallest villages. But beneath the divine image, pharaohs were still human. They felt fear, love, and ambition. Some were wise and just, while others were cruel or consumed by ego. The story of Akhenaten, for instance, reveals how one pharaoh dared to change Egypt's entire religion, closing temples, erasing gods, and declaring the worship of one single deity, Aten, the sun disk. His rule brought turmoil, confusion, and rebellion, for the people feared that such disruption of the divine order would anger the gods. After his death, Egypt swiftly returned to its old ways, erasing Akhenaten's name from monuments as though he had never existed. Then there was Hatshepsut, a woman who defied convention to rule as pharaoh in a time when such a thing was almost unthinkable. She wore the royal beard, took on male titles, and ruled for decades with wisdom and stability. Under her reign, Egypt flourished. Trade routes expanded, temples rose from the sands, and peace reigned across the land. Her story reminds us that divine right, in the eyes of the gods, was not bound by gender or birth, but by spirit and destiny. And of course, there was Ramses II, Ramses the Great, perhaps the most celebrated of all pharaohs. He built monuments so vast they seemed to defy time itself. The colossal statues at Abu Simbel, his sprawling temples, and the endless inscriptions glorifying his victories were all testaments to his belief in immortality through legacy. For Ramses, to be forgotten was the only true death, and so he ensured his name would echo through eternity. Even today, over 3,000 years later, his mummy rests preserved, his face calm, almost regal, as though still ruling over Egypt from beyond the veil of time. Yet even the most powerful pharaoh was not above the laws of death. In the end, they too were mortal. Their divine duty ended where the body failed. But the Egyptians believed that death was not the end, merely a passage. And so great tombs were built, pyramids, mortuary temples, and hidden chambers deep in the Valley of the Kings, each designed to ensure the pharaoh's soul could journey safely into the afterlife. Gold, food, jewelry, statues, and scrolls all were placed in the tombs to serve the pharaoh beyond the grave. Each pharaoh's death was a cosmic event. The rituals surrounding it were grand and sacred. Priests recited ancient spells from the Book of the Dead, their voices echoing through temple halls. Mourners wept, not just for the loss of a ruler, but for the temporary separation of heaven and earth. For a short while, the divine order was broken, until the next pharaoh ascended, reborn as Horus, continuing the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. What made the pharaohs so extraordinary was not only their power, but how deeply they became part of Egypt's identity. Even today, we see their faces carved in stone, their names preserved in hieroglyphs, and their spirits woven into the nation's history. They remind us that leadership, in its purest form, was once considered sacred, a harmony between the divine and the human, the seen and the unseen. So, as we let our minds drift through this golden chapter of Egyptian history, picture the glow of torches flickering against massive temple walls. Hear the whisper of the desert wind as it moves through ancient ruins, and feel the quiet awe that the Egyptians once felt when they looked upon their living gods, the pharaohs, guardians of the Nile, keepers of Ma'at, and the eternal flame of Kemet's glory.